We have seen some of the all-time seasons from different AFL clubs in the past, like Essendon back in the year 2000, where they only lost one game, and Carlton in 1995, where they only lost 2 games throughout a whole campaign. Now, we talked about those teams in the video right here, and with that video, we looked at the teams who had some of the greatest seasons in the AFL era and went on to win the flag. However, what about the teams who have had one of the best home and away seasons, but when it comes to finals, they choke? All their previous work means nothing. That's what we're here to talk about today. The best teams throughout the season to then choke their opportunity to win a premiership. Now guys, make sure to let me know down below the first team that comes to mind when thinking about the biggest choke from a team in AFL history. And if you do enjoy this video, then make sure to leave it a like and subscribe, as it helps out the channel so much. But for now, let's get into today's video. So first we'll take a look at the 2018 season with the Richmond Football Club. Just coming off a drought-breaking premiership the year prior, a lot of expectation was put on the Tigers. And to their credit, they started strong, winning 7 of their first 8 games, which included the Tigers' biggest win of the season, which was a 93-point victory over the Lions in round 4. However, throughout the majority of the season, the West Coast Eagles were hot on the hammer. That was until the final few rounds of the year. After round 17, the Tigers were able to break away, winning every single game on their way to finals and locked up a minor premiership. With 18 wins and just 4 losses throughout the 2018 campaign, they were undeniably brilliant, and many thought this team was going to go back-to-back. These sentiments were only amplified after the qualifying final victory over the Hawks by 31 points. With players like Dustin Martin, Trent Cotchin, Jack Riewoldt, and many more at the peak of their powers, it felt like no one could stop them. However, the next opponent would be Collingwood at the MCG. It was a ground where Richmond had not lost in their past 22 appearances. However, when the game began, the Pies had a point to prove. They blitzed the Tigers in the first half with a 44-point lead at the break, and the game was as good as done. Now, the Tigers tried to fight back in the second half, but the best team throughout the entire 2018 season would not compete in the grand final. It's kind of funny to look back at that year for Richmond, as they won 3 premierships in 2017, 2019, and 2020, but in 2018, their best performance across the minor rounds came in that year, and they didn't even make the grand final. So I'm sure most Richmond fans don't really mind about missing out on the 2018 grand final, considering they won the next 2 flags and won the year prior. But from a team who was favourite to win back-to-back premierships, to then be knocked out before the granny, had to sting the Richmond Football Club just a little bit. Now we wind the clock back to the year after the VFL changed to the AFL, and it would be a team who joined the competition 5 years prior and had a massive opportunity to win their first premiership. That was the West Coast Eagles in 1991. The Eagles were the first team to be introduced into the new Australian Football League from Western Australia, where their first season was in 1987. However, the Western Australian team throughout the 1991 season were almost unstoppable. They started the season in perfect form, having an unbeaten record at the end of round 13. And that same week, the Eagles recorded their biggest win of the season against Footscray by 118 points. And for anyone wondering why the ladder looks a bit strange, it's because in 1991, with the introduction of the Adelaide Crows to the AFL, the ladder and finals got a revamp. This system was implemented in 1991, and instead of having a point system for the ladder, the way teams were ranked was based on their winning percentage. Of course, at the time, West Coast sat at 100 because they had yet to lose a game. Now, this system lasted until 1996 when the AFL reverted back to the old point system. But anyway, back to the Eagles. West Coast were on top of the comp and smashing teams for fun. However, just after their victory against the Western Bulldogs came their first defeat against Carlton. The Eagles fought back gallantly in the final term, but just fell short by 3 points. And after a few hiccups along their way to finals, the Eagles finished at the end of the season with 19 wins and 3 losses. Now, they may not have been seen as the invincible team, like they were in the middle of the season, but they still finished on top of the ladder, 3 wins clear of second-placed Hawthorn, who would be their first opponent in the finals. With the Eagles being outright top of the ladder and playing at home, made a wonderful opportunity for the Eagles to win through to the next round. However, the West Aussies got a rude awakening. In a high-scoring encounter, the Hawks caused a massive upset against the ladder-leading Eagles, winning by 23 points. This sent West Coast to a knockout semi-final against Melbourne, where they dealt with the Demons pretty convincingly, winning by 38 points, and then went on to beat Geelong in the prelim final, which meant they were back to where they started, a grand final against the Hawks. The Eagles started strong in the first quarter before the Hawks broke in front. However, with wasteful goal kicking, Hawthorn only led by 10 points at the main break. It was a very even third quarter, with both teams kicking 5 goals 3, setting up for a massive final term. After dominating throughout the entire season, could they cap it off with a flag, the Eagles? Well, unfortunately, they weren't good enough on the day. The Hawks broke free from the West Coast, kicking 8 goals to 1 in the final term, and Hawthorn were run out winners by 53 points. A season that promised so much for the Eagles, all amounted to nothing. Now we get to one of the most infamous chokes in recent memory. A team that currently holds the longest premiership drought in the AFL, and the Saints, in 2009, was pretty much the closest they got to a flag since their first and only premiership in 1966. Now, the Saints had an outstanding season, winning their first 19 games. Their biggest came against the West Coast Eagles in round 3 by 97 points. But we have to mention the game against Geelong in round 14, because this game is seen as one of the best home and away season contests in the AFL era. Both teams went into the game undefeated and jostling for top spot on the ladder. This game had so much riding on it, and everyone knew it. The AFL pushed the game back 30 minutes so Channel 7 could broadcast the game live in Melbourne. Etihad Stadium recorded their highest attendance ever at an AFL game, with 54,444 people watching in the stands. And the game lived up to the hype. The Saints led all afternoon, but the Cats never stopped fighting. But thanks to a Michael Gardner goal late in the game to break the deadlock, the Saints won the heavyweight bout by 6 points. They were unstoppable, the Saints. And even though they still lost games against Essendon in round 20 and North Melbourne in round 21, St Kilda was still seen as the team to beat. Of course, they finished on top of the ladder, 2 wins clear of the Cats, and they were primed for a premiership tilt. In their first final, they played Collingwood and won pretty comfortably at the end by 28 points, and then played the Western Bulldogs in one of the better prelim finals that we've seen in the past 20 years. But it was the Saints who moved into the grand final against the team fighting them all campaign in Geelong. This is the team that had been challenging them the whole season, but hadn't been able to humble the much fancied Saints. A team so dominant throughout the entire year only had one more step, one more job to do: beat the Cats and break their 43-year premiership drought. And the game itself was an absolute classic. From start to finish, neither team could break away. The margin never exceeded 12 points for the entire afternoon. But the last quarter was where the game was won. St Kilda led by 7 points at three-quarter time, and even though they had stages of dominance throughout the game, they didn't put it on the scoreboard, and unfortunately, that was their downfall. The Cats stayed close, ready to pounce, and it was Paul Chapman who kicked a snapping goal late in the fourth term to give the Cats the lead. Geelong were able to hold on in the final moments to secure themselves a 12-point win and their second flag in 3 years. And unfortunately for the Saints, all their dominance throughout the 2009 season, 20 wins in the regular campaign and only 2 losses, all their fight, grit and determination meant nothing to the heartbroken St Kilda faithful. Next, we move to another team who won 20 games in the regular season, only lost 2, finished on top of the ladder, but couldn't finish the season with the premiership. That was Collingwood in 2011. Now, we briefly covered Collingwood in our best teams video, but let's take a deeper look at them. The 2011 season for the Pies is one of the best in their history. Their 2 losses throughout the home and away season both came against Geelong in round 8 and round 24. After a massive season, Collingwood finished on top of the ladder, just in front of the Cats, who had been the only team to figure them out throughout the entire campaign. The Pies eased past the West Coast Eagles in their first final, and in a tough prelim, they were able to find a way to beat the third-placed Hawks and book themselves a spot against Geelong in the grand final. Their final chance to claim victory over the team who had the wood over them all season. A chance to send their long-serving coach in Mick Malthouse out in style. Well, just before we get to that, we have to talk about the season of club champion in Dane Swan, because his 2011 season was absolutely insane. Dane Swan won the Brownlow medal and at the time set the record for the most votes since the 3-2-1 voting system was implemented. But could Dane Swan's team claim their second premiership in as many years? Well, unfortunately, despite being the best team throughout the home and away season, when it came to grand final day, the Cats were the better team once again. It was one of the great grand finals for the first 3 quarters. However, Geelong broke away in the final term, kicking 5-0 and going on to win by 38 points. Now, in hindsight, it's pretty hard to call this a choke, considering the Cats were with them the entire season and were the only team to beat them throughout 2011. But continuing with the theme of this video, having a great home and away season, finishing on top of the ladder with a great win-loss record, but not winning the grand final, leaves the Pies on this list. But finally, we get to a team who only lost 1 game throughout the season. A team who went throughout the entire year almost invincible. But when it came to grand final day, they stumbled and dropped the biggest game of the year. This team was Geelong in 2008. The Cats started their season off strong, winning their first 8 games of the season, but then received a rude shock in round 9. Geelong were on the back end of an 86-point defeat to Collingwood. However, this game didn't affect the Cats too much, as they went throughout the rest of the season winning every single game, which included their biggest win of the year against the West Coast Eagles in round 13 by a whopping 135 points. They finished the season on top of the ladder, 4 wins clear of second-placed Hawthorn, and after a dominant display in their first 2 finals, Geelong set themselves for a grand final against the Hawks. The only other team to record just 1 loss to this point in the season in the AFL era was Essendon back in the year 2000. Geelong were on the cusp of making history. All they had to do was win 1 more game. However, Hawthorn had other ideas. They weren't just there to make up the numbers. Hawthorn were there to cause a massive upset. Geelong had a lot of chances and unfortunately were wasteful in front of goal. In the second term, with 1 goal 9 to Hawthorn's 3 goals 1, the Hawks would go into the main break with a 3-point lead. And after a tough start to the third term from both sides, it was the former Port Adelaide Premiership player and Stuart Dew who made the difference. He was involved in 3 goals in under 3 minutes of play to give his team a game-high 5-goal lead. Now, Geelong were only down by 17 points at the final break, but the upset was well and truly on the cards. And when the Hawks kicked the first 2 goals of the last quarter, Hawthorn had the game in the palm of their hands. In a game where Geelong had 10 more scoring shots, it was Hawthorn who held their nerve in the massive moments to beat the Cats by 26 points. They really did it to themselves, Geelong. Not only did they do everything throughout the season to get to this point, but had opportunities to win it on the day. A team who was seen as one of the most successful football clubs in the modern era, winning 3 premierships in 5 years, but that 2008 season had to be the one that got away. But there we have it, guys, the best teams throughout a season to have choked their opportunity of a premiership. Now, before you go, make sure to like and subscribe if you did enjoy this one, but until next time, guys, I'll catch you all on the next one.